Welcome everybody to our Facebook live event on Destination Happiness. Tonight we're going to be talking about strategies to help teens cope with stress and anxiety. Now tonight we are super lucky. One of my favorite people in the world is Professor Lea Waters. Now Lea is a psychologist, researcher, professor, published author, internationally celebrated keynote speaker, and one of the world's leading experts on positive education, positive organizations, and strength-based parenting and teaching. She has been appointed as a member of the Order of Australia by the Governor-General for her upstanding service to mental health. As a mother of two teenagers herself, Lea knows the difficulties many parents are facing at the moment with concerns about their children's mental health after isolation. Lea has kindly offered to donate her time tonight to offer support to other parents and open up these much needed conversations. We encourage everyone tonight to write your questions in the comments below, and we'll try to get through as many as possible. Now, tonight we'll be chatting specifically about anxiety and stress and how to spot the signs. And Lea will also be offering some great preventative strategies that we can bring into our homes. And at the end of the session, we'll be able to tell you more about Lea's great products if you want to further educate yourself on her strategies. Now, I'd love to welcome the lovely Lea Waters.
Hey, Angie.
Hi. How are you doing?
We're interrupting each other already. I'm good. Well, as good as one could be through these times, but I'm all right. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes, and you're all the way up in Melbourne, but you're originally a Geelong girl?
That's right. I'm actually originally a Lara girl, but I went to school in Geelong, which in the 80s was called Bell Park High School. It has a different name now, but for all of those people there in the 80s, Bell Park High, yay, woohoo.
And tell me, if you were at school in the 80s, you would have had a spiral perm like I did, right?
I did not have a spiral perm, but I had the big olive oil fringe, and I used to tease my fringe up and put the comb in the back and tease.
Oh, yes. And push it forward.
That's the one. So yes, and the country road jumper and the little bow in the back of my hair. My sister had a spiral perm, but as you can see, I've got thick hair. I would have turned into an afro.
Afro, totally.
Big hair, but not the spiral perm.
Now, tonight's topic, you and I both know a lot about personally, because we've been both been pretty open about our experiences with anxiety. For our audience, what would you say about the anxiety you've gone through in your life?
Anxiety has been a long-standing part of my journey. I developed an eating disorder and anxiety in my teen years, undiagnosed, and lived with that through until my early 20s when I first started to get treatment for the experiences I was having. I was diagnosed with PTSD and worked on overcoming the eating disorder, had a lot of depression in my 20s through until sort of early 30s, and managed to sort of overcome the PTSD, overcome the eating disorder, overcome the depression. The anxiety, I have to say, has been more of a long-standing. I call it my relative now, because it's been with me my entire life, and there'll be pockets where my anxiety is very strong. COVID has been an example where the anxiety's really come back. And pockets where I learned to manage it. I guess in my own life, what I've learned is it's probably never, ever going to leave, in the way that, you know, I haven't had depression for sort of 18 years and haven't had an eating disorder for 20 plus years, but anxiety seems to hang around. And for me, the way that manifests itself is one of the common symptoms will be just waking up in the morning with a feeling of dread, with a feeling of just this feeling of muted fear, like something bad is going to happen. And it's before I've even really fully woken. And I think, well, what is this feeling? You know, do I have something coming up? And there's no thing that I can hang it to. It's just this pervasive, generalized feeling of fear and worry that something bad is going to happen. I do worry a lot, too much, and intrusive thoughts around, you know, accidents, things that might happen to my kids, people that I love, and then when it spikes, just that feeling of overwhelm, feelings that I can't cope, and teariness. So that's sort of the emotional side of it, and then The thing about anxiety that a lot of people don't understand is that they think it's just about your emotions, and it's not. Actually, the anxiety really plays out very strongly in your body. And so for me, the way that it plays out in my body is just a muscle tension and a sense of restlessness, that sort of jittery knee that goes up and down a lot, and a hypervigilance. And particularly for me, what it feels like is I can't breathe properly. So I get very shallow breathing, and a feeling that my rib cage it's just so tight. Like there's this giant clamp on my rib cage, and I just don't have that sense of ease in my body. And then when I combine that kind of physical tenseness with the emotions and that sort of low level but fear of something bad that's going to happen, then that for me flips over into sleeping issues and having trouble getting off to sleep, or getting off to sleep okay, but waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning and not being able to go back to sleep. And that's just been my cycle. I'm 49 now. I'm heading on to 50 in a couple of months' time. And that's just been what I've lived with for as long as I can remember.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's pretty similar with me. I feel like my makeup or my genetics, I was wired to be anxious a lot of the time. But I personally had a revelation last year. I just accepted that generalized anxiety was part of my personality, and I just had to live with it. And I was finding great ways to live with it, but it's still an uncomfortable feeling. But I actually got diagnosed officially with ADHD last year and experimented by going on medication for it. And it was completely life-changing. But one of the most surprising things is my generalized anxiety disappeared for the first time in my life. So for me, anxiety is, I've had the severe time when I've had panic attacks, which is horrendous. And then it's just that general uncomfortable feeling. But now I can say I'm probably in the best feeling time of my life at 45. So
that's great, Ange. It must be a great feeling for you to have that sense of relief after all of this time. And but I also like what you said about learning to live with it, learning to find ways around it, learning to manage it. Like, me, anxiety is one of my relatives now. It's kind of like it's part of the family. It's with me, and it doesn't mean that I don't have happiness, that I don't have a sense of fulfillment in my life. And you and I were talking about this earlier, and I've actually, if you don't mind, I've put together just a quick little slideshow of people who are famous, who have lived to the fullest of their ability, but have publicly talked about the fact that they are living with anxiety. So I'm going to share the screen, and we'll have a quick look at this little slideshow. For all the footy fanatics out there, you'll recognize Dusty, and he's talked really explicitly about struggling with anxiety. But here is a person at the top of their game, and you just never know what's happening to people from the outside, because you would look at this picture and you would never imagine that he is experiencing anxiety and living with an anxiety disorder. We've got Michael Phelps, US Olympian swimmer. Again, you look at this picture, you would never imagine that he is sort of living with an anxiety, but still this perfect specimen of like health and fitness. We've got the rapper, and Big Sean, the rapper. Again, top of his game, brilliant, talented, living with anxiety. We've got Ryan Reynolds, fantastic actor, and in this case, Deadpool. So just beloved by so many people, my two teenagers in particular, publicly talking about living with anxiety. And then we've got some female examples. We've got Lady Gaga, J.K. Rowling. We've got Emma Stone. So we're going from sports heroes to rappers, to singers, to writers, to actors and actresses. Then we've got Felicity Ward here in Australia, very famous comedian who has talked publicly about living with her anxiety. And I think that's such an important message for anyone who is living with anxiety, but particularly teenagers, to recognize that, ideally we overcome and we get through it. If we're unable to, we can live with it, we can manage it. It doesn't stop us from having a happy, successful, productive life. And these are contemporary examples of famous people who've lived to the top and reached the top of their potential, but done so nursing anxiety along the way. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen now, but I really wanted to kind of share that with you and with the audience, that it doesn't have to fully define who you are. It's just a part of who you are, just like you've got blue eyes or brown hair, or as you say, it may be a part of who you are for a short period of time, and then it doesn't become a part of who you are anymore.
Right. And as I was looking at those people, I think a common thread I've noticed with people that I know who have anxiety is that they can often be perfectionists. Yes. And obviously those people at the top of their game have strived for perfection, so they're there, but it can also make you too hard on yourself at times, can't it?
Yeah, I love that insight. It is true that people who have perfectionistic traits are more likely to have higher levels of anxiety. That's what the clinical research shows us. There's a fantastic book actually for all the parents out there, and it's called In Pursuit of Perfect. Mm-hmm. It's written by an author called Tal Ben-Shahar. So the last name is Ben-Shahar, S-H-A-R-A.
Love that in the comments.
Of Perfect. So yes, there's the perfectionistic side to anxiety, and it depends on which way you look at that, because we're definitely going to talk tonight about the downside of anxiety, absolutely, and some techniques to manage it, manage the physical symptoms of anxiety, manage those emotional symptoms, and manage the sort of cognitive thoughts that go along with anxiety. So the perfectionism is one of those kind of thinking traps that we have, that I'm not worthy unless I'm perfect, and there's 100%, and if I get 99%, I've failed. Like there's no middle ground between perfect and okay and all right and then fail. Like it's all or nothing kind of thinking. That's very black and white thinking, which we can work on overcoming that with perfectionism. But the other way to look at that too is to look at the upside of anxiety. So if you think about some of the symptoms of anxiety, we've got hypervigilance, meaning that we're always kind of like alert. We've got a quick startle reflex. I mean, what my kids joke with me, because they say, I will catch anything. I'm the quickest catcher. I've got the quickest reflex. And they'll be constantly testing me, and they'll be throwing things. Recently, it was Coca-Cola can. That one wasn't quite so much fun. But they'll throw things at me. Mum, quick, think quick. And I have very quick reflexes because my nervous system is on hyperdrive the whole time. So, and there's the perfectionism, which, has a shadow side, but also strives people to live to their fullest potential. One of the other sort of upsides of living with anxiety is that it makes you a very compassionate person. Absolutely. Because you understand what it's like to suffer, and you don't judge people. You don't look at people and think, oh, they've got their life together.
That's right.
You understand that what's on the outside can sometimes be very different to what's on the inside. So there are some upsides to anxiety if we have to live with it.
How important do you think it is that we do start having these conversations in day-to-day life?
So important, because what we know about anxiety is that it's the most frequent of all mental illness. Anxiety is the biggest. There are 2 million Australians right now who are experiencing anxiety. A third of the female population of Australians are experiencing anxiety, a fifth of the male population. Roughly 1 in 12 or 1 in 15 teenagers is experiencing anxiety. And interestingly, in the teen years, it flips. So there are slightly more boys experiencing anxiety than there are girls. Teenage girls are more likely to experience depression. These are large numbers of people, and the research also shows that anxiety is on the rise. So that the most recent research that was done in Australia is a little bit old now. It was from 2014 to 2015, but just in that 1 year, there was an 11% increase in anxiety across the Australian population. And of course, now we talk about COVID, and all of my friends in my profession, we're all booked solid with a range of things, but anxiety is the biggest one, because people are nervous about their future, and they're dealing with uncertainty, and uncertainty is a major trigger for anxiety. Some of the recent research that's come out around COVID is that there's an increase in mental illness more generally, not specifically anxiety, but all the whole gamut, spikes of up to 20 to 30%. in mental illness. And in my profession in psychology, we're all referring to it as the second pandemic, the second wave pandemic. So we had the illness, the virus itself, which of course we've still got, but now we're starting to see this second wave pandemic, which is the mental illness that's coming with it. And just one more stat around that, which is the Youth Insight Report in Australia did a national survey of teenagers and just asked them in one word, describe how you're feeling about COVID. And guess what the biggest word was?
Worried.
Anxious. Anxious, worried, uncertain, fearful, angry, annoyed, and frustrated. They were the top 10, but anxious was the biggest word.
So if you have spotted that your child might be anxious, or if they're not talking, I mean, are there ways to spot it? And if you can see it, what are the first steps you should take?
Yeah, okay. So, as a parent, what you're looking for in your children is, and remember that, anxiety is sort of split into these three compartments. There's the body compartment, the physical compartment, there's the emotional compartment, and then there's the cognitive or the thinking compartment. So, what we're looking for, or what the child or teenager will be experiencing from a body perspective, is that hypervigilance, tense muscles, change in sleeping patterns, that those kind of nervous body gestures, so the not being able to sit still, fidgeting, the knee going up and down, and fatigue. So they're kind of in the body cluster. And then you're talking about the emotional cluster. And the emotional cluster is that feeling of fear, worry, anxiety, uncertainty, just this looming feeling that something bad is going to happen, teariness, and mood swings. So sort of being okay 1 minute and then something small leading to tears or agitation or snapping and getting very, very, so short fuse. They're the sort of emotional symptoms that you would be looking for. The cognitive symptoms obviously are a little bit harder to see because thinking occurs on the inside. We don't express our thoughts. Well, some teens will, if you're lucky enough to have a teen who sort of has that emotional awareness, and we'll talk about their thoughts. But for most teens, they won't necessarily articulate or express their thoughts. So you'll see the physical things, tiredness, change in sleep patterns, change in appetite, restlessness, tenseness, and you'll see the emotional stuff. The thoughts are the way that anxiety influences our thinking, the cognition, is a couple of ways. One is just racing thoughts that speed through your mind. Angie's nodding to that one. Again, there's an upside to that because you think very, very quickly and you can get your homework done really, really quickly, right? But racing thoughts, the thoughts are around something bad is going to happen. I'm not coping. I can't calm myself down. I can't deal with this. I'm feeling overwhelmed. So that is about, you can't see your child's thoughts. You can get a sense of their emotions based on their actions. You can get a sense of the physical symptoms in terms of sleeping patterns and eating patterns and just that general kind of restlessness, or they might be complaining to you about sore shoulders or what have you. You can't actually see their thoughts. But their thoughts slip out. So that'll be, it could be the smallest little moment, like preparing for an exam, or an even smaller moment, like, being on Fortnite and losing the game, and thoughts will slip out. So you'll hear them say, oh, I suck at this. No one wants to play with me, or, I'm going to fail, or, nothing good ever happens to me, or typical, nothing good ever happens to me. Or, they might even articulate, I can't do it. It's too much. I'm not coping. So that's how you just tune in and listen to common things that they're saying. So they're all the symptoms. In terms of how do you get help? Well, I guess the first question then is at what point do you get help? And that's a really tough one for parents. So really it's about knowing your own child and knowing what we look for in psychology is the duration of those symptoms, the frequency of those symptoms, the intensity of those symptoms. So if you're seeing those symptoms right now because of COVID, I think that actually that's pretty normal reaction for all of us to have that anxiety. It wouldn't be something where I would necessarily be thinking, oh, they need to get treatment. But if the symptoms continue now that we're all back at school and we're adjusting to that revised normal. So typically speaking, in psychology, we'd say those symptoms have to be in place for about 6 months for you to start to think that's not just a unpleasant, but understandable reaction to the circumstances we're in.
Mm.
This is something more enduring. So 6 months is the duration. The frequency is that you have to have all those symptoms that I just mentioned. You have to have a cluster of those symptoms more days in the week than less.
Mm.
So if you're seeing your teenage son or daughter have those emotional outbursts, be irrational, be teary, be emotional, feel worried, feel anxious, or have those physical symptoms play out kind of 4 out of the 7 days, that would be a sign for you to be alert. But if it's only happening 1 or 2 days a week, it's not so much to be concerned about. So you've got duration and you've got frequency, and then you've got intensity. So if you can't get off to sleep until sort of 11 o'clock at night or 12 o'clock at night, that's one thing. But if you can't go to sleep until 2 o'clock in the morning, that's another thing. If you're teary or snappy once or twice, but if you go from 0 to 100 in terms of like rage or fear, and the fear is stopping you from being on social media or going out to catch up with friends or just general life, then that's intensity. So there's no like clear formula, but from a parent's perspective, what you're looking out for is how long do these symptoms last, how frequently are they happening during the week, and how intense are those symptoms. If you feel like they're happening really frequently and they're very intense, don't wait for 6 months. And the bottom line is, as a parent, trust your gut intuition. If you think that we need to get to the point where we're getting professional help, I think what you and I are going to sort of focus on tonight, Ange, is more of some things that we can just do as parents at home to help our kids.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We've got a few questions coming through, Lee. Is there any research to show social media is impacting our teens' anxiety?
Okay, I love that question. And unfortunately, there's a bucket load of research, and the research is really mixed. So what it comes down to is, for some kids, social media is actually helpful for their mental health. And for other kids, it's unhelpful. So there's not a kind of like one size fits all. But if you, again, trust your instinct as a parent, if you can see that social media is causing anxiety or feelings of being left out or comparing yourself to this sort of perfect airbrushed person or perfect life, if you can see that it's having an impact on your kid, then trust your gut around that. But the research really shows that the ultimate answer of like hundreds and hundreds of research studies is it depends.
Yeah.
And for some kids, it's a good thing, and for some kids, it's not.
There was a situation I saw play out with a friend and her child, and the child didn't want to go to school, and the mother knew it was anxiety. And the mother got advice from a professional to say, that's the crucial point when they're saying, I don't want to go, make them go at that time. That moment that you say, no, you can stay home because of anxiety, causes a way bigger issue. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I do agree with that. And one of the sort of approaches to anxiety, that the therapeutic term is called acceptance and commitment therapy, but it's an approach to anxiety where it sounds counterintuitive, but what you actually do is you get the patient, or if you're a parent, get your teen to actually lean into the discomfort, lean into those feelings of anxiety, lean into the heart palpitations and the thoughts of like, oh, no one likes me, it's going to be a horrible day. And just learn that we're actually stronger than we think. And we can live, and we can learn to accept the negative emotions. We can learn to accept the worry. We can learn to accept the anger. We can learn to accept the frustration. And when we do, instead of spending a lot of our mental and emotional energy avoiding it, when we just kind of lean into it. So I talk to my kids about 10 seconds of courage, just 10 seconds, just cross through the school gate and just do some deep breathing for 10 seconds. And the thing about anxiety is it doesn't last. It's not with you 24/7. You have these little bouts of it and these little moments of, oh, can't do this. And then a couple of minutes later, you're actually okay. So it's not the old mantra of like, what doesn't kill them makes them stronger. Actually, I don't subscribe to that, but I do subscribe to, with support, gently encouraging your kids to extend themselves outside of their comfort zone. And because then what the gift of that is that they learn that, oh yeah, I felt anxious, but those feelings passed. they didn't dominate my life. And a couple of minutes later, I was actually in the school ground. And as it turns out, I had some good parts of the day and I had some bad parts of the day, but I'm stronger than I thought, and I can get through this. We do it at the school gate, and then the next time they have social issues or exam pressure, or they're going for a part-time job, or, you know, they get dumped by their girlfriend or their boyfriend, they know this sucks. It feels really, really bad. But I've been here before and I can get through it.
I know these feelings and I can get, push past it. You just reminded me of a story that I want to share. It's kind of funny and kind of not. So after my bad panic attacks, I developed a phobia of driving over the Westgate Bridge. So I was just like, okay, that's the last thing I'm not going to face. I've faced everything else. I'm fine with everything else now, but I'm not going to do that again. And I reckon I'd been, 10 years or something. Mm-hmm. And one day I had to go to Melbourne because I'd just drive around the Westgate, around Footscray, and said no one had to go. Anyway, one day, Chris Mackey, psychologist on our show, he just happened to be in the car with me going to Melbourne. And I'm thinking, he's not going to make me face this. And I said, just Chris, in advance, just to let you know, I don't drive over the Westgate, just before you say anything. Tootle, 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 drive up. And he goes, you know what? I think you can. I'm like, no, Chris, don't make me do this. Don't make me do. And he said, I had full intentions to drive around. And he said, okay. I pulled into the petrol station. I said, right, Chris, I'm not going to do it. He said, why don't we flip a coin? Let's leave it up to fate. And I don't know why I bought into that. And I flipped the coin. And of course, it made me drive over the bridge. And I'm thinking, I haven't done this for 10 years. My palms are sweating. Chris is in my ear as I'm driving, talking the whole time. And I'm thinking, I can't believe I'm doing this. I can't believe I'm doing this. And anyway, before I knew it, I was over the bridge and I thought, oh my gosh, I've avoided that for 10 years and I can do it. And I felt over the moon, thanks to Chris Mackey. I was crossing.
It's really empowering. And so from a parent's perspective, it's to know when to sort of gently nudge and push and encourage that. I know it feels bad, but you're stronger than you think. You can get through this, and to know when it might cause damage. And it's a really hard line for a parent to do. But one of the really good tools to bring into your family is the practice of mindfulness and the practice of deep breathing. And, you know, you were able to eventually do that, Angie, because you had Chris there, you were supported, you'd had some therapy, but deep breathing it's such a simple thing, you know, keep calm and breathe. It's such a simple thing, and it's such a simple technique to teach our kids. But what the medical research shows is that when you do 2 minutes of deep breathing, so that really like into your diaphragm and out again, deep breathing, that what happens is the movement of your diaphragm, 2 minutes of that, triggers a response. Essentially, it talks to your nervous system and it tells your nervous system to calm down. And so you don't have that revved up heart palpitations and the physical part of anxiety, which means then you're free just to address the thoughts of, oh, I'm feeling unsafe here. But no, actually, look, no one's died on the Westgate Bridge forever, and there's guards. And so you can talk your way through whatever the scenario is. But just practicing that deep breathing with your kids, if you've got teens, particularly if you've got sporty teens, then that's a great way to introduce breathing. If you've got teens who are into dancing, they have to do breath work to dance and get through the routine. If you've got teens who are in any way musical or into art, you can introduce breathing into that. If not, if you've got like tech kind of oriented teens, there's beautiful apps out there. There's actually a simple one just called Breathe. It's a free app to download, and it's got a little picture of a lung that goes in and out, and you can program it. So you can say, I want to do 2 minutes of deep breathing or 3, and I want to do a ratio of 1 breath in and 2 seconds out. And so you can play with it and sort of have some fun with technology. There's another really good app out there called Smiling Minds, again, a free app. It's not so much just on breathing. It also has the mindfulness component attached to it. And mindfulness is also another really great technique to introduce to your teenagers, because it helps them to, what mindfulness does is it helps you to focus on what's happening right now. What am I thinking right now? What am I feeling right now? What is my body doing right now? And, you know, a big part of anxiety, major source of anxiety, is uncertainty about the future. People often ask me, what's the difference between fear and anxiety? So fear is when you are in immediate danger. But anxiety is a feeling about future danger.
Mm-hmm.
It's a feeling of fear about what might happen in the future. And so an antidote to anxiety is mindfulness, because mindfulness is about paying attention to what is happening to me right now. And mindfulness can be, again, can be running, it can be swimming, it can be walking, it can be having a conversation with a friend. And instead of thinking about what am I going to say next, or some homework I have to do, or what do I want for dinner, it's just saying, I'm going to really look into the eyes of my friend and focus on this conversation right now.
Yep.
Music is a great tool for mindfulness. Mindful coloring in books,
Yep.
a great tool. You've got the apps as well. So, and what mindfulness does is it brings you into the present. And so it's like giving your teen a little, like an emotional vacation, emotional holiday from the worry about what's going to happen in the future. And I'm just going to spend 5 minutes being right here, right now, and being mindful, doing some deep breathing, getting into the shower, doing my hobby.
It's really engaging all your senses, isn't it? I always, because I practice it a lot, it's one of the biggest things that helped me with anxiety in my life. But feeling the temperature, feeling, you know, the breeze, hearing what you can hear, feeling the feet on the ground, smelling what you can smell. It's engaging all your senses, and it just brings you right back to the moment.
Yeah, it connects you with your body. And so senses help. And I think in my teen years, like I said, I had a lot of anxiety. It wasn't diagnosed. I just kind of suffered in silence. But I was a swimmer. And I think that swimming up and down the pool actually helped me a lot. And I was also very lucky to have a horse. So I was a horse rider out in Lara, Little River Pony Club, actually, for those of you who are listening from that part of the world. And I think that was sort of an incidental therapy for me, just to be out, be on my horse, be connected, and just kind of be, you have to be in the moment when you're riding a horse, otherwise you fall off. So it was mindfulness, whether I knew it or not, and helped me a lot with my anxiety.
Yeah. What other strategies, Lee? Mindfulness is a great one. Any other sort of quick tips or tools that they can have in their toolkit?
Yeah, there's a couple of really good ones. And this is all about putting your worries into perspective, because what happens with anxiety is your worries grow and they become out of proportion. So a really great one is just to write your worries down on a Post-it note. Get a Post-it note, and as the worries coming up, just write it down. And that does a couple of things. Firstly, I mean, one of the symptoms of anxiety is called rumination. So you're just thinking, or feeling like something bad's going to happen. I'm going to get rejected. I'm worthless. I'm going to fail. So something bad. And it circles through your head. When you write it down on the Post-it note, you're taking it out of your head and you're putting it down. So you're taking it out each time. So you can't ruminate. That's the first benefit of doing that. But the second benefit is put your worries into perspective, because when I have those moments of anxiety, it's this overwhelming, just really big, but sort of diffuse. I can't grab it. But when I write it on a Post-it note, I'm like, wow, that actually fits on a Post-it note. It's not as big as I think it is. This worry is not as big as I think it is. So write your worries down. You know, if you've got a child who is into journaling is fantastic to do that. Again, it's that same process of therapeutic writing. The Post-it note I find really helpful because it doesn't have to be this big long monologue. It can just be a word. It's on a Post-it note. It's out of your head. So writing that down, that's a really simple strategy. Another one is the notion of worry time. And again, this might sound a little bit counterintuitive, but if you actually if you create a time slot in your day. So my worry hour is going to be at 5 o'clock at night. And that's when I'll worry about all of these thoughts that are coming through my head. And that way, when the thought comes in at 8 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I can say, you know what? I've scheduled that for later. And I'll have a look at that at 5 o'clock. And so it stops you from that ongoing, because that process of rumination is part of what causes the fatigue. It's very tiring. It creates a tax on our thinking processes, and it's tiring. So if we can just say, you know what, I'm parking that until my worry hour. And what often happens when you get to the worry hours, you've sort of forgotten about it and you don't worry as much. So there are some really simple techniques that you can do. Another one is called putting it into perspective. So that is a bit more cognitive, but it's really about saying, okay, with this thing that I'm worrying about, what is the absolute worst case scenario here? So COVID. The worst case scenario is I might contract it and I might die. So what is the worst case scenario? Well, that's pretty bad. And then what you do is you say, what's the best case scenario? So best case scenario is I live, all of my friends live, I grow as a result of this. School changes so that I don't have to get up as early and I don't have to wear a school uniform, and I can learn from home a little bit more, and my parents stop stressing out so much, right? That's the best case scenario. And then what's the most realistic scenario? In between death and me being able to structure school in the way I want, what is the most likely scenario that's going to come as a result of this worry? So that's a bit more cognitive. And again, it depends on your child. So for some kids, it'll be like the exercise, it'll be muscle relaxation, it'll be drumming, dancing, music, getting them out, just getting it out of their body, releasing the anxiety out of their body. For some kids, it'll be more of that mindfulness and breathing. For some kids, it'll be more of the emotional stuff and writing it down and journaling. And for others who are a bit more kind of like intellectual, it'll be like, all right, well, let's put it into perspective, worst case, best case, in the middle. And for those kids too, it's also that sort of catastrophe scale. So learning to tune into, what am I saying to myself? The thing about anxiety, and the way that I often work with teens, is it's like a radio station. It's like someone is transmitting this very negative radio station inside your head 24/7. And so you're having these thoughts of, you know, something bad's going to happen. I'm going to fail. If I don't get 100%, I have failed. I'm going to get rejected. I'm going to, whatever it happens to be. And so it's about helping your kids to tune into those thoughts and change the dial.
Yes.
Change the radio station. And that's about saying, okay, well, what's a different thought? How can I think differently about this? How can I feel differently about this? And there's some little tricks around that, some simple ones about changing the radio announcer's voice. So turning it into like a little cartoon voice or a little whiny voice or an old person's voice. And then all of a sudden it has less power over you. Giving it a name, giving your anxiety a name also helps to have less power. And then for some kids, they like to give it a caricature. You know, so it's like the Tasmanian devil is running around inside my head, or, you know, it's like a bad rap singer singing this bad rap song in my head. Or so if you give it a kind of personality, then what you're doing is you're distancing it. So then it's not who you are. It's just something that you're experiencing.
Yes. You just reminded me, because the lovely Kate, I'm not allowed to put the camera on her, but she's sitting beside me. She was telling me earlier about her son who has a name for his thoughts. I won't say the teacher's name, but he's got a teacher he doesn't really love. So he calls him that name. Can you just be quiet, that name?
Yeah, there you go.
But what you were talking about, it sort of just triggered, what worked for me too is someone said to me once, is what you're thinking rational? Because I realized, oh my gosh, I was thinking, oh, someone's going to break in and murder me. These are the thoughts carrying on. And stop and think, when's the last time that happened to anyone you know? Like, what are the odds of that happening? What's the odds of a shark taking you in the water, or you falling off the Westgate Bridge or whatever? So, but one of my favorite quotes around anxiety is from Deepak Chopra, and it's, the best use of imagination is creativity, and the worst use of imagination is anxiety. And that was such a revelation. Our creative minds, if you've got a naturally creative mind, it can create really bad scenarios. So being aware of that it can just conjure up the worst, that was a thing for me too.
It's just a thought, you know, and the thought will pass. And what you're talking about with teenagers, we call that evidence in court. You know, if you had to go into court and defend these anxious thoughts that you're having, what would be the evidence that you would put forward to the jury to say, I'm convinced that this and this and this and this is going to happen to me? So you have to have the evidence around it.
Yes. We've had a question come in. We hear the word stress all the time. What is the difference between stress and anxiety?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so stress and anxiety are cousins. They're closely related. They both have an impact on revving up our nervous system to defend us against a threat. Stress is typically, there's two ways of sort of distinguishing it from anxiety. Stress is more about what's happening in the moment. So it's a bit like fear. It's a response to what's happening in the moment, whereas anxiety is more about a fear of the future. Stress is more in a healthy range. Like, we have to have stress. Our bodies are built to be able to cope with ordinary levels of stress. What stress does is it revs up your nervous system, it gets your muscles ready, and we can't perform without a little bit of stress. If you go into a job interview, an exam, a sports grand final, a social situation without a little bit of stress, stress allows you to perform because it mobilizes it gives you adrenaline, it helps you to think, get that kind of 0 point thinking. So most stress is functional. When stress becomes distress, when it becomes very, very high levels of stress and it continues over a certain period of time, that's when it starts to click over into anxiety.
Yep. Here we go. Can you share with us the importance of strength-based parenting? And actually, can you tell us all about that? Because that's the name of your book, isn't it?
It is the name of my book. Whoever wrote that question, thank you so much. Yeah, look, we've been talking, Angie, about things that we can do to manage the anxiety. And by the way, with that last question, the difference between stress and anxiety, a lot of those things we can also use for stress. Not so much the evidence and the stopping the rumination, but just the general levels of stress. We can use mindfulness, we can use breathing, we can use exercise as well. But they're all about helping our kids in that moment of anxiety. They're all about helping our kids in that moment of stress. A lot of the work that I do now, and that's what's formed the basis of my book, is how do we prevent that from occurring in the first place? How do we prevent our kids from getting to a point of ongoing anxiety or depression or low self-confidence? And for me, that's really about taking a strength-based approach. And that's the essence of strength-based parenting, is how do we look at our kids to see first what is right about our kids, what is good about our kids, their natural interests, their talents, their skills, those quirky little things that they have about themselves. We focus our attention first on their strengths before we focus on fixing their weaknesses and overcoming their shortcomings and dealing with their faults and their flaws. So it's really about working with what they've got before we work on fixing what they don't have. And where that comes into line with things like anxiety is that every child has strengths. Your sons and your daughters will all have their own unique strengths, and they're all born with that sort of inherent potential. You'll know if you're listening to this and you're a parent and you've got more than one child, you'll see it. You'll see that, same environment, but they're different. From I have a 17-and-a-half-year-old son. He always makes me say the half because that means he's 8 months off being a legal adult and I have no say over his life anymore. But he's funny. He's just get out of town funny, like seriously funny, to the point where it gets him into trouble sometimes. And he's just always been that way. Ever since he's little, he's always been the comedian. He makes people laugh. His friends are all lining up 18th, asking him, like, will you be the MC? Will you give my talk? Because he's funny. He's always been that way. And my daughter, it's not that she's not funny, but she's very creative. She can't help when she's watching TV, she'll grab a piece of paper and she'll grab her pencils, and she's always drawing. She's always creating. So they've been those assets, those talents, those positive qualities have been there from the beginning. And when we focus on building up what is already inside our child, they get raised with a sense of confidence. Like wherever they go, their strengths go with them. And so it'll be different for different kids. Some kids, it'll be great IT skills. Some kids, it'll be like the gift of the gab. They can talk to anyone at any time, anywhere, and they can talk themselves out of any form of trouble. Some kids are great at mathematics. Some kids are really sporty. Some kids just have this great sense of like fashion design. Some kids are those natural kind of psychologists, and they're beautiful and kind. Some kids are wise. So every child has their own strength, and strength-based parenting is about helping you to identify what are the strengths of my kids, and then raising them with that knowledge that they have these strengths, so that wherever they go, their strengths go with them. And whatever challenge and whatever life adversity they're facing, they've got this kind of like inner toolkit that they can draw on to say, all right, well, I'm okay. I'm not going to break down. I can cope with this because I've got wisdom, or I've got perspective, or I've got patience, or, I've got good social skills, or I'm a good problem solver, or whatever it happens to be. And so it's really about preventing anxiety in the first place. But it's also about bonding, just positively bonding with your kids and raising them a way where it's boosting their confidence, not in a arrogant way, not in a like, let's kind of, just praise them for the fact that they breathed. You know, it's not that kind of false praise. It's very much looking at what is concrete in you, what is unique about you that's different to other people, and how can we celebrate that? And so it has a lot of benefits for the kids. And I've done years and years of research on this at the University of Melbourne. But the nice thing is it has benefits for us as parents too, because when we get to see that our parenting is working, and this is not to dismiss the fact that your kids have weaknesses and we still need to work on all of those things. But when we see what is right in our kids first, it boosts our confidence as a parent, and it just creates that lovely warm bond between your child and you. So when you are having those arguments that we're all having with our teens, I've got 2 teens, so know those arguments very, very well. But, you know, when you're having arguments about screen time or homework time or, you know, rudeness or entitlement or messy bedrooms, poor hygiene. I mean, that's just a sample selection within my own family. When you're having those kind of arguments, you just put it in perspective. You still have those arguments, but you think, yeah, all right, okay, there's some work to be done here, you know, but overall, they're good people. They're going to be all right. And so it also means, because your kids know that you see the good in them, they're just much more open to you having those constructive conversations and having those critical conversations because they don't feel like you're picking on them 100% of the time, because the day before you said, oh God, I love it when you make me laugh. I totally needed that laugh right now. So you're seeing the good in them.
And there's a great online test, isn't there, for adults and for kids to find out what your character strengths are. We'll put that link in the comments below as well.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, Lee, what are your top 5 character strengths? Do you know them off the top of your head?
Yeah. Well, so my first one is kindness.
Surprising.
And my second one is gratitude. Thank you. My second one is gratitude. My third one is curiosity. My fourth one is forgiveness. And my fifth one is honesty.
Beautiful. No surprises there. So when you fill in the test, you get your top 20 character strengths.
Yes, 24 actually. You get 24. And they're kind of rank ordered from the ones that you use frequently, that just come really easily to you, to the ones that you use less frequently down the bottom. Yeah. And there's, as you said, there's a youth survey. So there's one for teenagers to do, it's free, and there's one for parents to do, which is free as well. It's a lovely, really concrete thing to do. We're coming up to our, at least for the listeners in Australia, we're coming up to our winter holidays. So download the survey and do it, and then have a conversation with your kids. You know, what are my strengths as a parent? What are your strengths as a kid? What are our collective strengths as a family? How can we use these strengths to get through the end of COVID? How can we use these strengths to face adversity? How can we use these strengths to be happy as a family? And how can we use these strengths the next time we are feeling a bit stressed or overwhelmed or anxious, is to remind ourselves that, you know, okay, life feels a bit overwhelming right now, but I do have some things that I can draw on that can help to get me through. I know in my own journey of, you know, overcoming the eating disorder and PTSD and depression and anxiety, strengths have played a really big role in that, is learning what my strengths are and how to use them, but also really importantly, learning who to use those strengths with. So sometimes those strengths can be overplayed. You know, my top strength is kindness, and I've had that taken advantage of over the years, for sure. As I mentioned, gratitude, forgiveness is in my top 5. I'm actually a very forgiving person, but there are some people in my life who, it's not that I haven't forgiven them, I have, but I've had to walk away from my relationship with them because it was a harmful relationship. So it's learning about your strengths and then learning how to use them wisely. And that's such a gift as a parent, to be able to start that conversation with your children now as teenagers, and kind of setting them up on that positive trajectory.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful thing to I think it's a confidence boost for everyone that does it. I actually printed all ours out and stuck them up on the kids' wardrobe so they remember what their strengths are, even my husband's and mine. But it was funny, Chris Mackey, the psychologist, was around one day and saw our strengths, and I said, have a look at these. And right down the bottom, we all had self-regulation. And he said, no wonder you can even get out the door in the morning. And I said, we can't.
Family trait, low self-regulation. Actually, to be honest, Ange, that's pretty low with me too. Like, you know, if there's a donut and an apple, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to choose the donut unless I'm really, really self-regulated. So
yes.
Yeah, it is. It's really empowering. And I mean, the work that I do with kids, and particularly in schools, that's one of my favorite things to do, is when the teenagers do the survey and then they start swapping their strengths with each other. And then, and, you know, especially for those kids who lack a little bit of confidence, and then they find out they're good at something, you know, and maybe they're not like the top kid academically, or they're not, you know, super duper sporty, but they find out that like they've got wisdom, or they've got perspective, or they've got great problem solving skills, or they've got, you know, good social intelligence. And all of a sudden, something that they've always had that they haven't seen clearly, that they haven't valued, it gets framed as a strength. And they're like, oh, I remember, you know, one young boy who was growing up in quite a troubled family, and it just changed. He asked me, like, Miss, can I take this home? Like, I want to show my family. It was almost like a report card, you know, where you can't fail. Report card where you can't fail because you're good at something.
Yes, that's so beautiful. I know another little girl who had done her character strengths at school, and she was having a bad day with anxiety. And the teacher said, let's go and grab your character strengths. And he walked around with her, breathing and talking about her character strengths. And she shifted out of it, whereas she had wanted to come home from school because of that anxiety. And
I've seen so much of that. It's very, very powerful to connect your kids with their strengths for those moments of anxiety, but also just for those when life is going well. Like, how do you use your strengths to platform forward and think about what you want to be when you grow up, and you know, get yourself there?
Absolutely. Just one more question, actually, if there's any others, if anyone wants to quickly write in the comments before we wind up with Lee soon. This question's about, does an anxious parent mean an anxious child? And I have heard it said, you know, if a you know, children pick up on their parents' energy. So if the parent can be doing meditation to calm themselves down or whatever, would you agree with all that sort of stuff?
Yeah. Okay. So without wanting to sort of make that parent upset, the short answer is yes. And there's a range of different ways of looking at it. You know, one is epigenetics. So if you have mental illness running through your family, then you've got the sort of genetic potential for mental illness. Although now what they're showing is that you can have the genetic potential for it, but it's the environment that will switch it on. Much like cancer, you might have the genes for breast cancer, but if you grow up and you're not a smoker and you don't have much stress and there's not much pollution and you don't drink much, that gene won't get turned on. It's the same for mental illness. So anxiety, depression, etc. You might have the gene for it, but if you grow up in a calm, happy family, that gene won't get turned on. If you grow up in a dysfunctional family, that gene will get turned on. So there's the epigenetics of it, but then there's also the modeling. You know, we learn from our parents. We take our emotional cues from our parents, particularly in the first 6 years. So an anxious parent will often, not meaning to, create an anxious child because the child is learning from their parent about whether to feel safe in the world or not. And then you have what you're talking about, Ange, which is sort of in the moment. That you can talk about it in terms of energy. The psychologists look at it in terms of emotional contagion, but also it's a fancy term, but it's called co-regulation. And so what the medical researchers are now showing is that if I'm in vicinity to you and you and I are in a close relationship, we're connected, so a parent and a child, my physiology affects the physiology of my child. So they've done really great experiments where you have two people in the room, and if my heart rate goes up, even though I haven't said anything, the child's heart rate will go up.
Wow.
Vagal nerve, vagal tone changes, blood pressure changes. So there's this really like intimate sort of biological connection, which is called co-regulation, because how my nervous system is regulated regulates my child's. So the answer is yes, but I want to say to that parent who's asked that question that this isn't an issue of blame. And if you know that that's the case, then this is a great way to motivate you to start to say, okay, well, maybe I can start to do some of those mindfulness exercises and I can do those breathing exercises. And that serves two purposes. One is it lowers your physiology, so you're not having that synchronicity, that biological synchronicity effect with your child in the moment. But the second is it's role modeling. So you're role modeling to your child that I'm feeling a bit anxious right now, so I'm going to take 2 minutes worth of deep breathing. A really lovely exercise to do is just hand tracing. So you breathe in on the way up and out on the way down, in, up, and you just trace your hand and you trace it back. If you do that 4 times with slow, deep breathing, that's 2 minutes, and that resets your nervous system. But it's also very visual. So you're demonstrating that to my kids tell me, Mum, you need to take some deep breaths. So you're modeling that, and you're changing the kind of synchronicity around it, and you're giving them a different opportunity to not be as anxious.
Mm-hmm. We've got time for one more, Lee. Okay, our whole family suffers from anxiety. Eldest has high functioning ASD.
Mm-hmm.
That's autism spectrum
Mm-hmm.
disorder. Sorry. Yeah. And younger child, severe anxiety. How do I get them to engage with counsellors or online services? They want mum to be mum, not counsellor, and they don't want to talk to a stranger they don't trust. Can you suggest how I can get them engaged?
Oh yeah, thanks. That's a really good question. Take away the specifics of that family. That's often a question with parents of teenagers. How do I actually get them to seek help? And so there's a couple of different ways around that. The first thing I'm going to say is what I just said before, which is modeling. So what you're wanting is to teach them help-seeking skills and help-seeking ability. And that comes a lot from you as a parent. So seeking help yourself and modeling that. So that's one thing to do. Another thing to do is just to normalize it. Normalize having therapy with your kid. So you can talk about, if it was a physical injury, you'd go and see a physiotherapy, and you'd see them for multiple sessions until the injury got healed. If it was a physical illness, you'd go and see a doctor and you'd take the medication until the illness got healed. So just treating, recognizing that it's the same thing. It's about dealing with an injury or an illness and getting treatment for it. Another thing to do is to ask your child, if I could wave a magic wand and make your life different, how would you want it to be different? And just have that conversation about, well, what would life be like? What are the best parts of the high functioning ASD? Because there's actually a lot of superpowers with high functioning ASD. And what are the best parts of anxiety? And what would life be like if we could make the best of those and reduce the downside? So you're setting up that vision. If I could wave the magic wand. And then when they've got a clearer vision of what it could be like, they're much more motivated to say, all right, we need to get some help to get us to that point. So that's 3 things that you can do as a parent. If that's still not working, then peer voice. Black Dog Institute, get onto the website, the Black Dog Institute. That's a specific site for depression and anxiety for teenagers. There's a lot of youth voice. There's a lot of youth examples. There's chat rooms. So getting your teenage kids to talk to other teenage kids who may encourage them to go to therapy, or it may just be enough in and of itself. There's a lot of e-resources that you can use too. So you may not get them into see a psychologist, but they may get help through. So there's a website called Head to Health. So go to the Black Dog Institute, go to Head to Health. There's My Compass. There's My Mood Tracker. So there are kind of electronic ways of starting to help your kids get help if those other things don't work and you're not getting them into the clinical help straight away.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we'll list all those various things that you've spoken about and the details and the links, as well as Headspace being a fantastic one, and Beyond Blue. So we'll
they're both great
below.
Well, and probably just another one to add to that. And if we come back to the very start of like the talking to your kids about people they admire and the famous people who are living with anxiety, and the fact that they're getting treatment and they're getting help. Again, that's kind of providing those role models and normalizing it. I have a couple of summary messages for parents around this, and that is to be aware of what's the purpose of anxiety and fear and stress in the first place. The reason why they've stayed with us as a species is because they serve a purpose. They're all about alerting us to danger. So there's some good within the anxiety. What are the upsides to it? What's the purpose of it? The fact that it's pretty common. It's the most common mental illness. 2 million people in Australia. So if you're experiencing anxiety as a teenager, you're not alone. The fact that there are things that you can do to control it. So all of those things that we talked about before, exercise, drumming, music, breathing, mindfulness, writing it down on a Post-it note, having worry hour, journaling, catastrophizing, court of law, those kinds of things, playing to your strengths, despite It doesn't have to define you. It's unpleasant, but you can minimize the symptoms, and it doesn't have to define who you are. I'm a highly anxious person, but I'm also a person who's kind and grateful and honest and forgiving. And, you know, I've led a really happy adult life, and I have a family, 2 little kids and a husband, not little anymore, actually, 2 kids and a husband who I adore. So it doesn't have to define who you are. A lot of famous people have got it. And ultimately, you can come out of anxiety with more compassion, fast reflexes, quick thinking. So it doesn't have to be all bad. And I think that's just such a key message for young people.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you so much, Lee. Before we wrap up, can you quickly tell us about the products that you have available on your website that might be able to help parents further their skills in this area?
Yeah, thanks, Ange. So I've got 2 major ones on the website, actually, and that's an online course called the Strength Switch. Strength Switch is based on my book. So the book has been around for about 3 years. It's been the most wonderful experience. It's been a best-selling book. It's been translated into 10 different languages, and it's sold like bestseller all across the world. And the best part about that is just the parents from all across the world writing to me on social media and private messaging me and saying, this has transformed the relationship I have with my teenage daughter or my teenage son. And so the Strength Switch, not everyone likes to read. The Strength Switch is an online course. So it's kind of the book. And it's really interactive, lots of videos, fun games to do with your family, YouTube clips, great conversations to have with your kids, not just for teenagers, for younger kids as well. So that's one of them. And then the more recent one, which is just a downloadable, I've called it the Fun Family Pack. And it's a downloadable pack that's got 30 different activities, conversations, games, things that you can do with your kids. I actually developed it as a result of COVID and family lockdown. Things like developing a gratitude jar and having laughter library and doing the strengths profile and like just a whole range of fun things to do, creating a positive playlist on iTunes. So that's just a downloadable pack. Just go into the shop on the website and you click it, download it. And what it's going to do, especially coming up to the winter holidays, because we've all spent so much time together. And then our kids have just gone back to school. And now they're going to come back to winter holidays. We're all under each other's feet again. And really the point about that is that just one activity a day that injects a little bit of positivity into the family and helps us come out of the COVID experience stronger.
Yeah, amazing. So much information there that's gold to us parents out here, Lee. So thank you so much. Before we wind up, I want to thank the people behind the scenes. We've got Rowan Mackey, Sue Mackey, Chris Mackey, all the Mackey clan.
Thank you.
Kate, she gets cross if I turn the camera on her. Kate Meadows here helping me out on the sidelines. Thank you so much, Lee, for everything you've given us tonight. I also want to make mention of Chris and Rowan Mackey have a great podcast called Lockdown, Character Strengths and Silver Linings, which has so much great information around anxiety, depression, anything to do with mental health. Also, our Destination Happiness YouTube channel is well and truly up and running. So if you missed this tonight, you can see it on that, and also this will be replayed tonight from now on Facebook on our Destination Happiness page. So thank you all for joining us. We're going to be having regular chats with amazing experts like Lee in the next few weeks and ongoing. So thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Good night.